Hello everyone and welcome to our channel, Warhammer and Stuff, and today we're bringing you the stuff. We're not playing a Warhammer game, but this is a book review on the book Helbrecht, Knight of the Throne. Now, this is not going to be necessarily a spoiler review, which it is, there's going to be spoilers, but this is going to be essentially a book review, reviewing the book and its entirety and its place in the Warhammer 40k universe. Its characters, its writing, and stuff like that. This is more of a book discussion, book club kind of thing. And let me know if you like it, and like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, or have any nitpicks on anything, or agree with whatever. And yeah, so let's dive right in. The overall plot of the book is Helbrecht is being led by a vision to find a relic of Dorn on a planet, and so he goes to get it and get out. And that's pretty much it. Alright, book review over. So that is the basic plot of the story, the overall MacGuffin thing leading him on, but doesn't make for a good story. So I'm just going to go over the entire book, essentially beat by beat of what happens here. So essentially, how it starts off is actually a very good start. It starts off with Primarch Guilliman, who we do not see enough of in the universe. Probably he's one of my most favorite characters, like leading and moving throughout the books, but he starts talking with Helbrecht, and he's trying to persuade Helbrecht to give up the chase against the beast, if you know who that is, and actually do duties and help him in the overall war effort to deal with the overall issues at the Imperium. And Helbrecht is like, no. That's kind of basically it. And so Guilliman basically is like, alright, fine. Tells him some stories and stuff we'll get into later. And then the basic beginning of the books is him meeting with Grimaldus, finding out his new Emperor's champion. He's newly arisen to being a Primaris, Helbrecht himself. He's getting a feel for it. His armor's still damaged and dented, not fully healed from all the wars and stuff he's done, which is strange because he's a chapter master. I figured he'd have like a spare suit or something. And then after that, he goes, led by the vision, he goes to a ship to go to the planet. Grimaldus forces him to have a bodyguard and stuff, which he does need in the end. It's a bit more complicated than he would have originally thought. He goes to the planet. The planet is an interesting one. It is built up as one of the worlds from the Scouring, where Dorn himself led a very vicious purge of the planet, a very spiteful purge. It was built by the Iron Warriors, this planet. One thing to note is that I cannot remember any names, almost ever. It's very hard for me to remember the names because I inhale these books so fast. So I read it, but I cannot remember these characters' names or these places' names to save my life. So they go to the planet, and it's a planet that has been ordered by Dorn, specifically him, to never have one stone upon the other. And so the whole planet is basically leveled. And pilgrims come to it, and if they find stones, statues, or anything, they smash it with hammers. And the whole place is this barren wasteland. There are people on it who live on there, they have a planetary governor, they have all that stuff, they have some small guards and stuff, small military force to guard it, but basically these people live in abject poverty, forced on them by Dorn, and all his chapters keep it up, and all the Imperium keeps up with the order given. But there is a castle and some small buildings for the governor and stuff. And essentially, he meets with the governor. The governor gives off some weird vibes. He and the rest of his Black Templars get a guide to go to places. And interestingly, the Emperor's champion who is with them has the ability to basically be led by the Emperor, or vision, or feeling. For a very non-psychic chapter, there's a lot of superhuman spiritual, magical things happening with the Black Templars that's touched on quite well. And so they go throughout the place, and they reach a point, and then they find an entire suit of Iron Warriors armor built up like a scarecrow. They react poorly and kill the guide, and they are ambushed by the planet's people, which I can understand. I mean, if all the Sons of Dorn and Dorn himself have basically forced you and your entire world and people to live as scavengers and in poverty, yeah, I can understand why they would have a problem with that. But the Black Templars make short work of them. Shortly afterwards, in the fight, they come across a Iron Warrior champion, because he better be a champion. He goads and trash talks the Black Templars. The Black Templars tell him to shut up, and then Helbrecht gets beaten into the ground by this champion, who has a poison axe of some sort. So There's some believability there. He gets beaten back, and Helbrecht's friend, who is a Blade Guard vet, essentially, has his shield cut up into pieces by this axe and is beheaded. And then Helbrecht, being poisoned and sort of knocked down, gets taken by him, and then they go off, heal. They find the remains of their ship, which was blown up, so part of it is still working and they're getting repaired. He heals up, he gets better, seeing visions and stuff, and then they go follow the Emperor's Champion, and they find a fortress, which is interesting considering no stone left unturned on the planet. They butcher their way through the forces, make it there easily. Helbrecht gets inside. They find the Relic of Dorn, which is surprisingly... It's in a very well-built area, essentially, and can only be entered by a Son of Dorn. They check their gene code. Once they enter, they find it's a piece of his armor. Kind of strange for that to be the relic. Like, why would Dorn leave that and then they build a temple for it? I assume this would have been something way later after Dorn was gone and a piece of his armor was put there. That's strange. And then they split up. Helbrecht waits. The actual Iron Warriors warlord comes there, a Cataphracti Terminator, the champion, who for some reason I do actually remember his name, Valka, and two other Scrub Iron Warriors meet him and ambush him one-on-one. Well, not really ambush him, I mean he's waiting there for him. And some pretty interesting fights. Essentially what happens is, after getting beat into the ground by the champion, Helbrecht all of a sudden turns around, destroys the champion, destroys the ceiling overhead to kill off the Scrub Iron Warriors, and defeats the Warlord easy. I'll get more into the action, how the fights were later, but I'm giving the beat by beat. After that happens, the whole castle or fortress collapses on him, he gets dug out, they get the relic, and then eventually they leave, and then they bring it back to the, their crusade, and then they launch out. And there's some development and stuff, and by the end of it, Helbrecht decides, you know what, I'm going to give up vengeance and I'm going to go for duty. And help Guilliman in the overall war for the Imperium and stuff. And that's essentially the beat by beats of the book. Now let's get into some more details. Alright, so we're actually going to focus on the characters. So, in the back of the book, the author who did this said that he interviewed and got prepped and warmed up. He's relatively new, I believe, to Games Workshop, and so he got to interview all the other authors and stuff and really build the background of all the characters, the main people, how they are, all the lore and stuff, the important details that we don't know, like the behind the curtain stuff. And so he did some pretty interesting stuff. So let's talk about the main character of the book, Helbrecht. One of the big things that really stood out to me is he's really talkative. He talks a lot. Unfortunately, TTS kind of ruined my image of him. But when he's in here, he's actually he talks a lot. He's very poetic. Sort of, I wouldn't say preachy, but like that sort of scriptural kind of speak. Very poetic, elegant, and very talkative. He's very friendly amongst the other higher-ups, specifically, and charismatic. And so, everyone else calls him Lord. He is very friendly and straightforward to a lot of the higher-ups, his friends and stuff, who he does have here and there. And so that was actually kind of surprising, because this is really the first time I really see his character. This is the first time I've read a book specifically on him. And he came out very chatty. That was actually pretty interesting. The champion, who I cannot remember his name, but he was mostly as a character himself, he was basically someone who was a nobody, being a space marine, he was a nobody in the Crusade, and all of a sudden he's elevated to being a equal to Grimaldus and Helbrecht. Well, not a full equal, because Helbrecht talks him down a little bit after he begins to get a little too big for his britches for a moment. But then again, he is elevated, and his character was nothing really noteworthy, but he was a good vessel for, as this is kind of lore stuff, which I'll get into more later, but he was showing a newly ascended Emperor's Champion and how sort of that kind of person grows into the role or is inducted into the role. And so this is us seeing a person become an Emperor's Champion. This character, he was an apothecary, very interestingly, and all of a sudden, due to visions and stuff which he shared with Helbrecht, he ascended to becoming an Emperor's Champion. When the guy went to the chaplains and told him about his vision, they realized who he was, and they made him the Emperor's champion, which apparently there's only one of at a time, because there's only one black blade. I thought that there were multiple Emperor's champions spread out throughout the campaign, or the campaigns, the crusades, but apparently there's only one at a time. And so he's basically elevated from apothecary to standing next to the chapter master and no longer having to call him Lord. And so the person in itself is not really important. It's just, yeah, he's just a placeholder for what the role is of the Emperor's champion. We don't really know much about him. He feel very little characteristics about him other than he could never have been someone of such a high station before. And so he's just basically a cutout character so we can see the role of the Emperor's champion. But there's nothing really unique or important about him, except one small interesting detail that I caught. So at the very back of the book, the author talks about what he does. And apparently he's relatively new, but he actually has a day job. And he works for the NHS, which, me being an American, I have no real understanding. I mean, I can't explain what it is, but I do know that it has to do with the British healthcare. So he works for, essentially, the hospital system over there. I see what you did there, author. You made the apothecary, the doctor, become the Emperor's champion. I see what you did there. Alright, the Blade Guard champion. One of the other real characters in the rest. He's in it for half of the book. Sadly, he passes. Dies fighting a champion, so clearly he rolled poorly. But he is it's kind of interesting, though, because it's mostly his dynamic with Helbrecht. Helbrecht, this is my first time really seeing him being chatty, but the Blade Guard champ was treated, even though Helbrecht was his lord and stuff, he was very friendly, more surprising he was treated with so much respect by Helbrecht, and that there wasn't, this character mostly was to show more aspects of Helbrecht, to show that how he was, Helbrecht isn't like some chapter masters who everyone is beneath them. He's not the chapter master of the Carcharodons. He's not Azrael of the Dark Angels. So he's very friendly and personable, and this Blade Guard champion was a good friend, very chatty and open with him, and was a good friend of Helbrecht's for a very long time. So that's his character, essentially. And as far as that goes, there are some other characters there, but they're just in the background. There's no real character to them. They just fill out. They're not necessarily red shirts that just die. There's some aspects to them. There's a new neophyte coming in, a banner holder, stuff like that, but they don't really have distinct characters. Like, I can't imagine what these guys would do on their time off, essentially. Except the neophyte, getting trained. That's pretty much it. And so they just melt into the background. They're just there to fill the jobs. There's an apothecary, there is the neophyte, and there's a few troops. That's it. But I will bring up that Grimoldus is in it for a very short period of time. Talking pretty much like an equal with Helbrecht, and helping him, and it's surprisingly disobeying Helbrecht. Helbrecht wanted to do this mission alone. Grimoldus was like, alright, here's your team, go. So that's an interesting dynamic to see. Alright, so let's get into the action. Let's focus on that now. So an interesting mix. There's about 2 duels and some skirmishes. So the first actual true form of action is actually some training. So it takes a few weeks for them to get from their ship to the planet. And interesting note is that they just go through duels. The neophyte fights, they challenge each other, they fight. Interesting, you get to see a little bit more of the background of the Black Templars, is that how they engage in fights. They can do it without their armor, with short swords, stuff like that. Weapons that they wouldn't use. I don't recall seeing Black Templars use short swords as their main weapon. But they duel even with the neophyte and the other troops to maintain their skills and stuff. And interestingly, very interestingly, the Emperor's champion fights against Helbrecht using dummy long swords. I'll get into more detail about it later, but it was a simple just setup to show like the skills of the Emperor's champion, and yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what it did. I'll get into it later because it has some interesting lore effects with it. Now, the first real fight is when they get surprised and see the scarecrow of the Iron Warrior's armor. Their guide immediately tries to do something, does not do anything, gets beaten into the ground, and has his head crushed in the end by Helbrecht, I believe. Then they get attacked by a bunch of rabble, which the first real fight there really doesn't do anything. It's mostly just them getting shelled, them getting peppered with rocks and dust and stuff and shrapnel and stuff, and them just ignoring it. Mostly Helbrecht talking a lot, chatting, giving speeches and stuff. We don't really see much of the fight. They just get slaughtered in the background. There's nothing... I only remember this fight because it happened, but I don't remember anything in it because, well, it just happened in the background. That's one of the key things I'll give in my reviews, is that things will either stick out to me, are interesting, or they're not, and they're forgotten. I know there is this fight because, well, it really wasn't satisfying. It was just mostly to show that all of a sudden the planet is following the Iron Warriors. Well, most of the planet. Then the second fight is when they're moving throughout this broken land. Basically, just it's sort of like stone desert. Everything is broken out. There's tons of stones and rocks everywhere because the planet is basically leveled and no stone upon the other. So tons of stone, sand, and desolate wasteland. But they get attacked by armored columns of, I don't know, those Tauruses. You know those from the Tempestus Science, those cars and stuff. So they get attacked by a convoy of them. A few of those cars get dropped, actually really cool. It's one moment I'll get into later because it's one of the more memorable moments of how the author writes how it happened. But essentially, in that fight, the first champion, Valka, with his poisoned axe, comes out and trash talks the Black Templars. And then, sounding like pastorally or scripturally, Helbrecht tells everyone to ignore him. And essentially, the fight commences. Not immediately with the champion. Essentially, they get the whole Black Templars charge and get charged by tons of cultists, essentially, or the followers there. And then, of course, the Black Templars are slaughtering them. Now, here is one of the issues I had with the book, was didn't use the Emperor's Champion how I would have liked him to. I'll get more into that later, but essentially, Emperor's Champion apparently forgot that he's supposed to hunt down enemy champions, because he just runs off and starts killing scrubs. And so Helbrecht takes on the champion. The enemy champion just lunges himself at Helbrecht, and it's a pretty straightforward fight. Some swingings of weapons, hitting back and forth, but Helbrecht gets hit in the shoulder with a poison axe and starts to get weakened. However, I know Iron Warriors do not really have anything to do with the Dark Gods. They do not look upon demonic possession or their gifts lightly. I know there's one warband that cuts off limbs and stuff. Can't remember what it's called if they ever get mutated and stuff. And so Helbrecht basically bisects the guy, puts his sword straight through his gut. That should have been it. I mean, like, that's a very strong weapon. It should have easily destroyed him. Then the guy who has a giant sword in his stomach headbutts Helbrecht so hard that he kind of like stuns him and kind of knocks him out. It's like, with what abs working can you do that? I mean, alright. So, I mean, Helbrecht pretty much should have won that fight, but like, plot armor or something. And somehow, a newly raised Primaris Helbrecht gets defeated by this champion. Sure, slowed down by the poison axe. Sure, stunned by getting headbutt in the head. But like, I mean, that guy should have died. That's all I'm saying. It's like, I don't recall him having no feel, no pains, but whatever. And then, of course, to save Helbrecht, the Blade Guard champion comes in, and then, after getting stabbed through the gut, this champion then easily slaughters the Blade Guard champion, cuts him to pieces, and beheads him. And then, the champion then does the smartest thing, and then runs off. Although he could have probably finished Helbrecht, maybe. Depending on how the fight would go. But that's what happened. Then, yeah, that was the second fight in the first real duel. Now, the last battle is broken up into two parts. There's the actual battle, and then there's the final confrontation with their main boss. So the final battle is them being led by the Emperor's Champion to where he believes the relic is by visions and stuff, which is pretty interesting for a non-psychic chapter. A very vehemently non-psychic chapter. But the fight, how do I put this? The storming of the castle, as described, is them going through trenches filled with troops, slaughtering them, getting to the castle, throwing guys off the walls, backhanding some of them, and that's about it. There was nothing really specific or unique about it that really caught my attention. In fact, sometimes my eyes glazed over because it felt like I couldn't follow it. The overall flow to the battle, essentially. That could be my fault, but like, I couldn't really... The lay of the land and how the battle flowed and stuff and how it was written was a little loose and stuff. And it couldn't keep me attentive to it. But essentially, they basically, as a blender, go through a bunch of troops through to the castle or the fortress and stuff. Upon entering, they spend a long time looking through it in the underground tunnels and stuff. The Emperor's champion leads them through it. Then they split off. Helbrecht goes off to his own for some reason. And then the Chaos Lord, the champion who wounded him, and 2 other scrubs come. And this is the duel. Or the duel, I guess. How Helbrecht, after getting completely beat by the champion, now facing 2 other Iron Warriors and a Chaos Lord and Cataphractii Terminator armor win. It starts off smart. And so, apparently the Iron Warriors in their infinite wisdom decide to artillery strike the castle that they're all in, while the Black Templars are in it. I mean, okay, cutting it close. Danger close, man. So how Helbrecht defeats the first 2 is he takes his melta-gun and shoots the top of the ceiling, causing it to cave in and crush the 2 Iron Warriors in the behind. And then he goes to the side and basically he fights the champion one-on-one, because I assume basically how it's written is that the Terminator armor guy, the Lord, is trying to catch up. And essentially, this time, Helbrecht just absolutely defeats him. Helbrecht gets hurt in the shoulder again by the Chaos Axe, but this time he's immune to it. And he basically just cuts down and just slaughters the champion easy this time, cutting him multiple times in the face. The champion's face is falling apart, and then Helbrecht just finishes him off and cuts him up. Then when the Chaos Lord comes in, it's not much different. The fight is a bit more interesting. I'm beginning to see this throughout it, is how to defeat Terminator armor is by attacking joints, cutting apart pieces so that it basically becomes crippled. And so how Helbrecht defeats it is, apart from blocking the attacks and stuff, is attack the leg joints and stuff and basically break the structure of it so the Terminator armor, or the guy carrying it, basically becomes crippled and he can't move. That's essentially what he does. He bisects the back of his legs, causing him to collapse, like on his knees and stuff. And then in the end, slams his sword through his head and stuff. And I'm beginning to see that as a common thing that, written-wise, 40k-wise, is how to deal with Terminator armor apart from heavy weapons, is to cripple them and then finish them. So overall, that was a bit plot armory-ish, it felt. It was cool in the end how he fought the Chaos Lord, but defeating the champion and stuff like after the precedent sent from earlier was a bit odd. Alright, memorable moments, things that stuck out to me, things that are interesting with the lore as well, to flush out the lore. So probably one of the big memorable moments for me actually was in the first real fight when the Taurus trucks are coming over as the melta-gun. So Helbrecht destroys one with the melta-gun, but what really stuck out to me was the description of how it happened. Essentially, Helbrecht took out his gun, his melta-gun, fired it, and the description of it was that it penetrated the front and it hit the driver. But what happened was the driver was instantly like completely burst into flames, and then all of a sudden, like all the other occupants in the car instantly were lit on fire as well. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. The residual heat, if a piece of flesh or like a body completely just instantly evaporates into fire, the residual heat should be incredible. And so how it was described as instantly the driver gets immolated instantly, just like the melta-gun punctures through it, he's immolated immediately, and then everyone in the car catches fire and burns as well. And so that was actually a well-written part. It stuck out to me. It was actually kind of cool. It's like, yeah, why don't meltas be like sort of like a, not really a blast, but like hit multiple enemies? Because if they're close enough and a person immediately bursts into like a flame grenade, then yeah, why not? Yeah, we need that more. Alright, the other thing that stuck out to me, Helbrecht losing that duel, that was bull. Helbrecht, I've seen stats on tabletop. In what universe is a Primaris Helbrecht losing to a lowly Chaos champion? He just had a poisoned axe. I mean, sure, he's probably like a champion. He has a lot of cool abilities and stuff. He probably, yeah, he did get to swing first and stuff like that. But like, in what universe is Helbrecht losing? So that was... I know how a champion can beat someone, a Chaos champion could beat Helbrecht, but it's going to take more than just a single poisoned axe and getting super lucky that he somehow didn't die when Helbrecht rammed his sword through him. and could still fight him off, and then a Blade Guard vet right afterwards. It's like the author is a bit new and needed to make that more believable. How I would have probably done it to make it more realistic is if the cultists, the troopers, the cultists, and the champion were fighting together, and that every time Helbrecht was trying to swing or hurt the champion, the cultists would get in the way, physically blocking him, shooting him at point blank, stuff like that. It's like there could have been a lot more done. It's like, yes, the champion and that army could have caused that problem, but the one-on-one dual nature aspect, there's no way, in no universe is a champion doing that. Not with just a poisoned axe. That's not happening. That's just not happening. So that took me out of the book. It could have been done better. Alright, the next thing that really stood out to me, the Emperor's Champion. The character, he is not much of an individual, but he is the shell for the Emperor's Champion to highlight the uniqueness of it. So what really stood out to me is, well, first off, the Emperor's Champion throughout this book is basically leading them on a place he's never been before to find a place no one knows about. Somehow the Emperor's Champion is really, really able to hear from the Emperor and find things, like literally as a GPS. That's a big deal. That's a very interesting fact. The other thing is, the Emperor's Champion, I always assumed is someone just chosen by the Emperor, because like all the things I've known from the Emperor's Champion, in that he basically is like the Emperor is blessing him, and so they give him the best armor and the black blade. And so I assume that tabletop wise, he just gets really good because he has these super powerful weapons from Terra and stuff, and like the black blade was in the vaults of Terra and stuff like that. So I assume that's why he becomes so strong. That's not it. The Emperor's Champion gets buffed by the Emperor, because he was originally an apothecary, and so they do show this, the author does do this well, is that during the time when they duel, the Emperor's Champion, I mentioned this earlier, duels Helbrecht, and they come to a draw. In what universe is an apothecary in a basic duel with a longsword, which he has never really used before, is fighting Helbrecht to a draw? I mean, it's not real combat, it's practice, but still, Helbrecht didn't wipe the floor with him. And so it seems that the Emperor's Champion actually gets empowered by the Emperor. That was an interesting thing, it seems, that I didn't know beforehand. And he becomes this lightning rod guide for the army. He hears from the Emperor, he's guided by the Emperor, and he's empowered by the Emperor to fight greater. That was actually pretty cool, and didn't know that. Another moment that was pretty good is towards the beginning when Guilliman is talking to Sigismund. And so, apart from Guilliman is really trying to convince Sigismund to give up the search for the beast, because we all know like how Yorick, Gabriel Seth, all these guys are hunting down Ghazghkull Thraka, and Helbrecht is really leading the chase. But Guilliman is asking him, please, these planets really need reinforcement and help, they're very key and critical. Do not chase the beast, go to these places and help reinforce them, I need your help here. And Sigismund's like, no. Just straight up repeatedly, no, no, and no. And Guilliman, realizing it's pointless, he does talk to Helbrecht about basically his founder and stuff. Asks Helbrecht about Sigismund and stuff, and Helbrecht talks about his founder from his perspective, what they know, and Dorn. And this is where it's pretty interesting writing, and that is pretty well done. It's just a short passage, but it felt more genuine and authentic to the issues at the time. When Guilliman told Helbrecht essentially from his perspective, from a family perspective, and that the sword that Helbrecht wielded was made from Dorn's sword that he broke. Essentially, he was talking about how Sigismund was a son trying to console his mourning father. And Dorn was really broken after the Horus Heresy, and he told Helbrecht that Dorn was really changed afterwards and he was in great mourning, and that Sigismund was trying his best to console his father, and that Dorn chose vengeance to try to make up for what happened to the Emperor and stuff. And so he was trying to use this story to try to persuade Helbrecht basically to help with the greater war effort, but he did talk about these characters from a family perspective, from their dynamics and what was really having problems at the time. Sigismund was a son trying to console his father and make up for him. Dorn was really stopped focusing truly on his duty and just wanted vengeance, which is the source of the story when he led the Scouring. And so that was a pretty interesting, nice lore moment. Overall issues of the book, though, I did have some. Unfortunately, I believe that the Emperor's Champion was wasted. There are some ways I can think about it. So, the Emperor's Champion is ascended. Helbrecht is helping guide him as well to help him really go into his new role, despite the Emperor's Champion being sent to help him find out everything. And he's just wasted. Like, I was waiting for the time when the champion is going to step up and fight hard and get ready to face off against a champion. I thought he was going to face off against the enemy champion or face a warlord or something else. But apparently he's really new to his role and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. He doesn't know he's supposed to seek out enemy champions because he spent the entire time fighting scrubs. The moment scrubs and stuff, just cultists showed up, he went and fought them. Like, I've played the Emperor's Champion on tabletop. He could kill like 3 or 4 dudes at best, unless you got good dice rolls, but he slaughters champions. So, like, clearly he's new to his role. He doesn't know what he's doing. Goodness. And, yeah, so overall, the Emperor's Champion was literary to show us what a newly ascended champion is like. From a lore perspective, that was good. But I am disappointed that he was not utilized as a champion slayer, a character slayer. So that was a bit sad. The other issue I have with the book is essentially the overall aspect of the book. The conflict is at the beginning, Helbrecht is choosing vengeance against Gaskell instead of doing his duty. And Guilliman tries to persuade him using the story of his father and stuff over the duty that Dorn sort of neglected and focused on vengeance. That was essentially the setup. And the story overall was to get Helbrecht to then decide, you know what, we will do our duty instead, and just instead of focusing on vengeance. That, it didn't really feel earned. At the very end of the book, Helbrecht is like, you know what, we're going to focus on our duty, and if we fight Gaskell, we fight him. If fate allows it, we'll do it. But it didn't really feel like a real good lead-up of him changing his mind and really... There wasn't enough really that made it seem like it to go from, you know what, let's do our jobs instead of focusing on what we want to do. Like, I didn't really feel that payoff was well done. I didn't really see the transition or the character arc for him to decide to make this decision. He had a bunch of visions involving Dorn and stuff, which were cool how they were described and such, but it felt a little forced in the end, cheap. Like, it wasn't set up well enough throughout the book. Granted, the book is only 200 pages or so. It's not 300, so it wasn't that long of a story, but for this change to happen, more story beats would have had to happen to make him realize it. And the story beats that came for it really didn't make me think he would choose duty over vengeance. I mean, like, they were just treasure hunting. That's basically it. My other issue with the book was the highs were not high enough. So the highs were not high enough, lows were not that low. It was like, there were no problem with the lows. There were no real low points in the book, or really just parts, boring parts. It was just, the highs were not high enough. The fight against the champion wasn't high enough. It's like Helbrecht was beaten by one champion, not a squad. If he would have faced a squad and it was a good fight of like how he defeated the squad, lined them up like dominoes and beat them one at a time, outmaneuvering them, taking out his gun at points and stuff, and just dropping like 2 or 3 of them like with a lance with his melta-gun. It's like, no, it's just like the highs were not high enough. Probably the only cool part was how he took apart the Chaos Lord at the end, but it's very brief. It's like, apart from the lore stuff, there really wasn't anything that really was like, I would want to reread this moment. Like, I've reread some 40k books because they were good, and I'd want to relive the highs of them. But this, the highs were not high enough. There's one other last issue I have, but it's more like, it's weird, because I agree with what is done, but it makes no sense because this involves common sense, logical thinking, which is in short supply in the 40k universe. Heavily, they're held down by tradition, by superstition, by this is how we've always done it, by this is by lack of vision in some cases. That's where Guilliman came in and united the Imperium to actually do stuff instead of just rot. But this is one of the big things, is that at the end of the book, Helbrecht overrules Dorn. Dorn decreed that this planet is to stay dead as a memorial. Pilgrims came from all over. He overruled Dorn and said, you know what, that was a bad idea. He appoints someone new to become... They came across a bunch of pilgrims. I never mentioned in the book, but it never really mattered. They were side characters. But he finds a pilgrim leading a bunch of people. They make a ramshackle army out of him, and he appoints the head of the pilgrims as the new Lord Governor. Now, and he allows them the authority to build up the planet, raise armies, and contribute to the Imperium. Alright, so that makes sense. That's a smart thing to do. Everyone needs to help and contribute. This world needs to be alive because they basically made everyone resent Dorn and his Imperial Fists in their successor chapters. This was a smart thing to do. Now here's the only problem I have. He chose to overrule Dorn. In what universe would Helbrecht of the Black Templars go against their father directly? And second of all of Dorn's sons know this. So what happens if like a Crimson Fist come by and they see like people building and stuff, and they see this planet being built up? What are they going to say? What are all the other of Dorn's sons going to say? They meet up at like every 150 years for the Feast of Blades. Don't you think that's going to come up in conversation? The other chapter masters talk to Helbrecht. It's like, what did you do? Why are you going against our father? It's like, it makes sense that this planet needs to be built up. Well, like, I don't believe it. There's too many U-turns, like 180s in this book that are unearned. And so, makes sense, but I'd like to see that conversation when the other chapter masters or some other chapter comes by from Dorn and sees them building up the planet. It's like, what are you doing? So, that's interesting. Now, here's the thing. In 40k, there's many books in 40k all talking about tons of stuff, and so where does this book fit in the overall mythos universe 40k? This is a side story. This is a simple side story of one character going through essentially character growth. It shows off some stuff of the overall lore of the Black Templars, how they function, how the Emperor's Champion functions, and some background and setup for some people say Dorn's return, but they sow seeds here and there. But overall, this book is just a simple side story. It fleshes out stuff in the 40k, and it's a simple one-shot. Things can happen. There's not, apart from Helbrecht, all the other characters. It's good to have the best 40k books are books written where there are no named characters that have models. None of them. Or anything like that, because then anything can happen. But this is a nice simple side story. It's out there. If you like the Black Templars, it's interesting. And the overall goodness of 40k is all the different side stories, quests, chapters, and their stories all in the same universe. That's really what makes 40k pretty cool and great. I know the Horus Heresy has been one big long story, but all these little side stories of all the other chapters and things like that, the Soul Drinkers Omnibus and stuff like that, a huge whole drama on one corner of the universe at one point in time, adds a tremendous amount of depth to the 40k, cool stories, but in the end, they came, they went, they were good for when they were there, but like, yeah. So a bunch of side stories is good, but this wasn't the greatest of side story, it just fleshed out stuff. Overall ratings for the book, there were some interesting things, there were one or two cool things, but overall, it was a nice little story, but it was disappointing to me. The highs were not high enough, the champ was never utilized as a champion. The author is new, essentially. He is an author, he can write, but he's overall new. The book did not have what we crave, like the true meat and potatoes of 40k stuff. The fights were meh at best. And I saw what he did there with the Apothecary. I saw you doing that, the Emperor's Champion. Overall, I would say this book is hard to say, 2 out of 5 to 3 out of 5. I was more disappointed than positive of it. There were some good lore parts and characterization stuff, but overall I was disappointed with the story or what happened in it. Yeah, and that's about it. So that was my book review. They won't be that common or often. Well, a few more will be coming, but because I don't read that much, when I do read, I inhale it too much. I actually intentionally avoid reading because it's a drug to me. So this will be one video, comes out whenever. More book reviews will come in time. These are more like overall reviews of the entirety of the book. And yeah, so thanks for listening if you made it this far, and